Okay, so here we are at Wraysbury 1 on the Arcade Leisure Complex, somewhere I hold very dear to my heart, having first fished here about 30 years ago for those old and historic fish back then. And here I am back again now. And today I'm going to take you for a wander around the complex, tell you a few stories, show you a few of the famous old swims and talk about some of them famous old carp. So the first time I ever set foot on Wraysbury, it was a very different day to today. It was windy, it was wild, it was so savage. And having come from Horton, where I was fishing before that, it was a very daunting prospect. I mean, it's slightly different now as the lake's cut into two separate sections, but back then it was all one vast area of water with a total of about somewhere in the region of 20 carp in it. So yeah, it's fair to say I was a little bit apprehensive as to how well I'd get on. So, as I've already mentioned, the stock level on here was very low back then. I said 20 carp. There were around 20 catchable carp, if you like. I'm sure, well, I know that there were probably slightly more than that. There were a few fish in here that never got caught. And even some of the fish that fall into the 20 category hadn't been caught there was one hadn't been caught for 11 years, a known fish called the short fat linear. So they were very elusive fish. And like I say, a vast venue. I think it topped out at 120 acres, I think, the whole lot together, which made it daunting for a lot of people, but that kept the banks very quiet. It was only a cheap ticket at the time, so it wasn't as if it was sort of, you know, an exclusive venue and it was hard to get on. It was very easy to get a ticket, but people just didn't come. It was only for the brave, really, and I don't include myself in that, because before I fished here, it was people like, you know, Pete Springate and stuff, you know, maybe Kenny Hodder and Dave Cumpston, and, you know, there were anglers on here that at the time I really looked up to. It was a big step for me. It was a very large step to come from the sort of lakes I'd fished to somewhere like this, you know, somewhere so vast with such a small stock. But there was so much more on offer here than just the fish themselves, which were incredible. You've got the likes of Mary's mate, you know, the Hoover, the pug, these amazing creatures. But you had the peace, the peace and quiet of the place, and you could pretty much do what you liked back then. You could use boats. You know, if you wanted to make a swim, you'd make a swim. If you wanted to have a bonfire with the stuff you'd cut down and, you know, put your spuds in silver foil and put them in the embers, you'd do it. But it was like a boy's own adventure. I absolutely loved the place. So eventually I plucked up the courage and decided I was definitely going to fish Wraysbury. And I was fishing at the time with a friend of mine, Phil Thompson, Tomo, and he was coming over here with me. Now, this was back in the day of the old close season, and we spent quite a lot of time walking the pit. He lived quite close at Hampton, I lived down in Crawley, which is not too far, 50 minutes away, something like that. So we came up here throughout the close season and walked and walked and walked. And we bumped into one other fella on most of our walks who was a tench angler, so we ended up calling him Tench Bloke, and the three of us would go on to fish together quite a lot throughout my whole time on here. Now, we spent a lot of this looking time right up the top of this North Lake between Sunnymead's Corner and a swim called the Lawn, so the whole bottom, the railway bank of the North Lake. And we used to see fish down there regularly. Close season, obviously, they're a lot tamer. So we started feeding them, and we fed them in Sunnymead's and we fed them in the Lawn, and there was a swim in between called the Bus Stop, and we fed them in there. And we saw the characters of the lake, the known fish. We saw fish like Mary's mate, etc. But we used to see these three fish together all the time. One was the short fat linear, which hasn't been out for, you know, 11 years or whatever. Another one was the fish that would go on to be called the pug. It was actually Phil Thompson that named it the pug. That fish, as far as we knew, hadn't been caught up until this stage, or if it had, it was a lot smaller and many years before. The third one was enormous. It was the same sort of stamp as Mary. It was a massive fish. We couldn't see any visible scales on it, and we used to call it the big leather. And these three amigos used to swim round together all the time at that end of the lake. And I baited and baited and Phil baited and baited. And anyway, come the first day of the old fishing season, like June 15th, I set up in the lawn swim, and I was very, very confident. And I remember being with Pete Springate. He was fishing on a little point next to me. This is before it started, the day leading up to the midnight. And we were both sat on this lawn, just on the grass with our feet dangling over the side. And this short fat linear swam past us. Now, at this stage, I didn't know which one it was. I just knew I'd seen it a lot. And Pete said to me, he said, "Oh, there's the short fat linear." He said, "It hasn't been caught for 11 years. And I thought, well, I've been feeding it for 3 months or 2 months or whatever. Anyway, come the first night of the season, a couple of fish showed in my swim. I'd got my baits out there. I was red hot confident. Phil, Tomo, was fishing in the South Lake right up the other end. And he was on fish, big time. He'd seen Mary up there. He'd seen a couple of others. And this is when I made probably the biggest mistake I've ever made in carp fishing. It still hurts me to this day. I decided to wind in my rods, put everything on the barrow and walk it, which is, you know, no mean task, it's miles, all the way up to Bryant's Point where Phil was, and fish with him for these fish that he'd seen. He was saying, "Oh, you've got to get up here, you've got to get up here." So I did. A guy called Shaky Dell moved in behind me that night, and he caught 2 fish. He caught the short fat linear and the pug from where I'd been baiting them for months beforehand, and they were my captures, you know. I mean, not taking anything away from him, he did the right thing, I did the wrong thing. I moved off of the prime opportunity to open my account with 2 of the most special fish you can imagine. Completely ballsed it up, to be honest, but that's carp fishing. Right, so this is the lawn swim that I've spoken about. It's not technically the lawn swim, as is with a lot of the swims here. They've just been repositioned slightly to make them in better areas. The original lawn was just here in these trees, and all of those trees weren't there. They're new growth, all of that. That was a big grass area. And this was the swim where I made the monumental cock up and moved off of the fish on my first session. And to be honest, it still hurts to stand here now. So I managed to blank that first session on here, whereas Phil Thompson did exactly the opposite. He went and caught Mary, the largest fish in the pond. You know, one of 20 catchable fish in 120 acres. On his first trip, he's caught Mary from the end of Bryant's Point, fishing about 6 inches off the bank. But I had to wait a fair while for my own first capture. In fact, I think Phil had probably caught 3 by the time I got my first bite, which, coincidentally enough, was from the very swim that I fished last night that I'm still sat up in now, a swim called the diving board. It's changed a little bit. It used to actually have a platform going out there which resembled a diving board, hence the name. And I found fish in there one day, saw them showing, managed to borrow a boat, went out there for a look. Unbelievable. I had this little glass, a bucket with a glass bottom, and I got out there to roughly where I thought the fish had shown, looked over the side through, because as soon as you break the surface layer with glass, you can see a lot better underwater. And I looked over the side, I sort of looked up first, triangulated my position, and thought, yeah, it was probably about here. And I looked over, and they were there. It was deep, it was weedy, and there were these great big Wraysbury mirrors just circling under the boat. It was so exciting. And I found a little spot, put a rig down there and a saucepan full of hemp, done the same 3 times for all the rods. Those fish showed all night, literally one after another. They were booming out there. And I thought something's wrong. I knew it wasn't because I'd hand placed the rigs, but it wasn't till about 10 o'clock the next morning that I finally got a bite and played and landed after a major battle in the weed, a fish that we called Malins. Originally it was called Goldie, but I'd seen a photo of Dave Malin holding it in a book, and I'd referred to it as the one that Malin had, and it eventually became known as Malins. I think it was 36.5 pounds, and that was my first Wraysbury capture, and it was just blew me away to, you know, finally catch one of these amazing creatures from a lake like this. All my friends from Horton came over to witness it. There was a load of us on the bank. There was a big party that evening afterwards. It was a major event, and a major event in my fishing life. Okay, here we're in what we used to call the Finger Bay Peninsula. It's a little bit different now because this used to be a dead end, and then the North and South Lake were joined at the end of this little peninsula. Now it's part of the path through. But this wooded area here, if you look through the trees, you can just make out somebody's bivvy in the background there. Well, that was never a swim. All of this was solid woods, and I actually cut that swim out. The original swim is a lot smaller than it is now, but I cut that original swim out back in one November, I think, maybe October time. Me and my mate Tench Bloke cut that swim out because we had a job over in Chelsea, which is not too far away, doing coving. I used to do Artex in coving, plastering, that sort of stuff. We had this coving job over in Chelsea, and we wanted somewhere safe to leave our gear in the day, go to work, come back, fish at night. So Tench Bloke went in the only swim along here, which was the Rocky Barge, and I cut this swim out and set up a swim in there, and I actually caught cluster. That was my only my second ever carp from Wraysbury. I caught cluster, I think it was 36 pounds or something. One morning, just 10 minutes before I was due to leave for work, I caught cluster from that swim. It was bitterly cold. But where we cleared, it was solid trees in there, and where we cleared them out, a lot of them were like this, sort of semi-dead standing, stuff that can break up and burn really easily. So we dragged all of this timber, loads of it, in one big tree, all the way back, and we took it all up that evening, and we took it over here. And we brought up all the timber, and we piled it against this old structure, this stone structure. And we built a fire that night of such proportions, it was unbelievable. You could melt, and we did, little glass bottles. We had some of those French lagers, those little tiny green stubbies, and you could put it in the, or throw it in the heat. It was almost white hot, and they would just instantly implode and melt down to nothing. Aluminium cans went like that. We attempted to cook some potatoes in an old biscuit tin. They were in there about half an hour. We pulled it out with a stick and opened the tin, and there was nothing but ashes in the bottom of it. It was brutal, this fire, and it actually made a crack. I don't know if I can still find it. It made a little crack in this stone wall with the heat of it. But yeah, we had a rare old night that night. You couldn't get anywhere near it. We had to sit right back there on the grass. But yeah, even things like this old stone wall bring back memories. Excellent. I suppose the one downside of the place back then being so open access, because you could just walk straight in. It's very different now, it's very secure, but back then you could walk straight onto the venue anywhere you liked, and we did get quite a lot of grief, quite a few thefts. Your cars weren't safe if you left your tackle in there. Personally, I had somewhere in the region of half a dozen different incidents of theft. I had my tyres slashed once, I had all my gear nicked once, I had stuff nicked out my swim once, various stuff like that. So you had to, you know, you had to be on the ball, you had to keep your eyes open as to what was happening around you. Not so much sort of in the interior once you got within the lake, but on the outskirts of it, it could be a little bit. But like I say, that's all changed now, so I feel a lot more secure to walk away from the gear knowing everything will be safe. So Bryant's Point, God, I haven't stood here for well, nearly 3 decades. That's mental. I did try and come out here a few years ago to show someone, but we literally couldn't get through. I used to love it out here. This is like the biggest, this is the middle, if you like. If you can have a middle of what's basically 1, 2, almost 4 lakes joined, but this is the biggest middle area. And there's, still remember, there's 2 rows of bars out there, and I think one was about 120, one was about 80, and then there's a smaller little patch close in, maybe 60 yards, something like that. And we used to go out here in the rowing boat. I used to borrow the rowing boat off of one of those gardens, one of them houses there. That's Douglas Lane, and this is Bryant's Bay. And these houses that back on to Bryant's Bay, there's a guy over there we used to call the shootist. He used to come round in camo gear with a high-powered air rifle, and his mates all dressed the same. They were a bit odd. They used to make out they were hiding. I think they thought they were in Vietnam, to be honest. If a helicopter went over, they all went to ground. But they used to shoot anything, like birds and rabbits and what have you, loads of stuff. They'd kill anything. He had this old camo, old-fashioned rowing boat, and he gave me the key to his gate, and I could help myself to it. So I used to use that, and I used to go out there with the old glass bottom bucket and locate these bars and put like sort of lumps of foam with line wrapped round and a big lead, drop them down, or the inside of a kinder egg. Inside a kinder egg you get a little yellow or blue shell the shape of an egg, but has the toy in it. I used to put a cork in there with light line around the cork, snap them together and lower it down, and then just click it shut when you got to the right depth. But I used to mark them up, bait them up, and fish them from here. I say the swim was a bit different, as in it wasn't quite as grown as this. We had a little fire site at the back there, and my rods down the front. It fished really well here in big windy conditions, but with such an expanse of water, it was a nightmare. I remember being out there in the boat. I only had one oar. Be out there like that at the front of the boat, the back of the boat right up in the air, and you'd have your rig and your head in this bucket to stop it drifting off, and the bottom would be going past you like looking out of a car window. It looked like it was doing about 40, and you're waiting for the spot to come past, and as the spot comes past you throw your rig, chuck a handful of bait, and the next thing you know you're right over there, or there depending on which way the wind's blowing. But yeah, I used to love fishing out here in big wild conditions, and I've had some good catches from here as well. I think the most notable was probably at the end of my first year in the winter. It was February time, and we, as in me, Phil Thompson and Jacko, my mate Jacko used to fish here. He lives just over there actually. We'd all been off on what we called the winter tour, just fishing easier lakes, and we'd blanked on all of them apart from Jacko, who caught one from some lake in Chichester. And in February I thought, I really fancy coming back here. So me and Phil decided to come back here. Now it was Phil's, it was some sort of do, a leaving do or something at his work. So he was going to come later. So I came down here and decided I was going to fish here, and Phil was going to fish just in a little swim down the way here, halfway down the point. So I came in here and it was flooded right the way back up there, totally flooded. And I put my wellies on and I got down the front, and back then the gear was I used to use. I've got a little Cardinal 55. It had a broken handle, the actual handle had snapped off, and I'd bought a little bolt and enough nuts to fill it, like make it into the length of a handle, and then I'd wrapped masking tape around it and squodged it into like the right shape. I came down here and I got me like 1.5 ounce lead and my Grange boilie, and I've just chucked it out in the rough direction of the closest patch. It's gone in, and I've catapulted a few round it, and there wasn't really anywhere to put the other rods, so I stuck them out the side here. Anyway, I'm sat here under the brolly, February, and later on that evening, well after dark, I've heard crunch, 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 and then smash, and then crunch, crunch, and crash, and I thought, here comes Phil. And I've looked up, and from where I'm sat, I can just see he always used to wear beige cords and carpet slippers, and usually a Paddington Bear t-shirt. He's very eccentric, Phil. Lovely bloke, but a bit out there. And I see these cords walking in the gap I had to look out. I'd got it right down. and these pair of legs came in like that. He went, "All right, Doug," because they always called me Doug because of Douglas Lane, the road. He said, "All right, Doug." And he was a bit slurry. I went, "Yeah, you, Tomo?" He went, "Yep." And suddenly the legs just sort of tilted and he did a crab dance and just disappeared out of view and smashed into the bushes. And that was him gone. Eventually he's gone down there to set up his gear, and I thought I'd better go down and help him, bless him. So I got down to his swim at the end there, and he was staggering around. He only ever had this little wave lock. It didn't even have sides, it was just this little wave lock brolly, and he's trying to put it up, and I helped him, and he'd got more beer than he'd got fishing tackle as always, and we cracked open a couple of beers and got him all set up. We're halfway through doing this, and I might have had a sounder box actually. Either that or I've heard, but anyway, there's this beeping as a beard, you know, beep, 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 beep. And I looked at Phil, I said, "That sounds like a bite. I think I got one." So I come running back down here, and he comes sort of staggering along behind. Sure enough, the rod out here on its own, the one I just chucked down there, it was going, proper going. So I've gone down, and I've hit into this fish, thinking it's going to be a coo or anything but a carp. It's February at Wraysbury. And I've looked into this fish, and I've got one on, Phil. I said, "It's Wraysbury, it's February, I've got one on." And he's going, "You have, Doug, you have." So he was playing this fish, and it was doing the do, like proper, obviously a carp, obviously a good one. So I had the tugging and throwing and that with it. Eventually we got it in, netted him. It's only Bloody Mary, like the biggest carp in the lake, and at that time we thought would be the biggest carp in the land. Everybody was fully expecting Mary to be a British record. Now, I'd love to tell you what the record was then. I think it might have been 52 pound. I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. Anyway, people thought that this fish would be a British record. So there's me and Phil. Phil's very inebriated. I'm soon to be very inebriated after catching this. And fishing right over the other side was Pete Springate. Now, back then, I don't think I had a mobile phone or anything, whatever. I ended up, or Phil ended up, I think, walking round there and getting Pete. Somehow we got hold of Pete, and Pete came round and witnessed it and put it all up, hung it in the trees. It weighed 49 pounds and 15 ounces, which was 1 ounce under 50 pounds. And I thought it was hilarious. I thought, that's brilliant, you know? I've still to catch a 50 pounder gives me a target to go for, and it was just funny. Like the weight amused me. But anyway, we done all the do, and got some photos of her and what have you, and we did get very, very drunk. We had a great big fire afterwards later that night, and well, I say Phil was already drunk, but I caught him up. But what an occurrence in February! You know, the biggest fish probably in the land at that time. Yeah, 49 pounds 15 ounces. But I had, you know, I've had other great captures from here. I think if I remember it correctly, I know I had 4 fish from here. I think I had them in 2 braces, consecutive mornings. But back then in Wraysbury, there was the big uns, what we used to call Mary's gang, Mary, Cluster, Mary's Mate, the Hoover, you know, 5 or 6 of these known big fish that used to get caught a fair amount, really, seeing as it's such a big lake and there weren't very many of them. But there was also in here what we called the odd uns. Now the odd uns were the smaller ones, the sort of mid-20s, old fish that didn't get caught very often at all. And believe it or not, they were really our targets because they were harder to catch. And one morning in a massive wind out, it was horrendous, I managed to have 2 bites. And I caught 2 fish, and they were both odd uns. I had a brace of odd uns, and I got them up on the bank, took them round there, and the sky cleared and the sun come out, and I've got a lovely photo of me with the 2 fish and my old carp dog Fat Sam, these 2 odd uns. And that to me was like the ultimate achievement, if you like. And the other fish I caught Mary's Mate, and I caught the pug. I'd lost the pug, I'd narrowly missed catching the pug on a floater. I'd had lots of encounters with the pug and never caught him, and I eventually caught the pug from this swim. So this I suppose out of all of Wraysbury, this and Sunny Meads I hold the dearest because of not just the captures, But everything else that's happened out here, we nearly lost the whole point one night. He's gone now, bless him, as in passed on. But one of the houses over there had a Dutch bloke in it, who we called Dutch bloke. That was our way. Everybody was something bloke. There was a bloke that used to plumb a lot, so he was plumb bloke. We had Dutch bloke. We had an old boy over there called I Dug the Pit bloke. Everything had a bloke on the end. But Dutch bloke had decided one night that he wanted to make a swim here, somewhere just here, for his nephew to fish, so that he could see him from his back garden, keep an eye on him. His nephew shouldn't have been fishing here anyway, but Dutch bloke didn't care about rules. So he's come over here and he's built a swim. And we've seen it, we've turned up, and we're fishing over there. I think it was me and Tench bloke round in the car park. And I thought, cheeky sod, he's cut a bloody great swim there, and there was loads of timber and that here. Anyway, we've gone back round there, we're fishing, it's later at night, and all of a sudden we've heard this noise, and it's crackling. You can't mistake the sound of a fire, and you can't mistake the sound of a big fire. It's big cracklings and pops and roars and stuff, and we're like, Jesus Christ, something's alight. Anyway, we've come round to the corner where we can see across, and the whole of the end of this point was flames 20, 30, maybe more feet high. Huge, great plumes, fire and smoke, and everything was going. It was proper burning. So we've legged it. Let's go all the way around this bay to try and put it out. As we've got level with the bottom of Dutch bloke's garden, he stood there, covered in soot, going, I didn't do it, I didn't start it. Nobody said you did, Dutch bloke. Obviously, blatantly did. He'd had a little fire which had got out of control and nearly burnt down the whole end of the point. And he came round with us and we managed to beat it out, turn in all the sides and get it to go down. But it'd done quite a lot of damage. It's all grown over again now. But yeah, that was the night we nearly lost the end of the point. So yeah, all in all, I loved this swim. This whole end, and it was the closest walk to the pub and the Chinese, so it had an awful lot going for it, this did. Bryant's Point, what a place. So here we are in the Dredger Bay, which used to comprise of two swims. One the other side of the dredger, and this here was the other swim. We used to call it the Dredger Drive-In, I believe. Because before the gravel and before this lovely bridge, there was just a muddy track that used to come down the side here and turn round, and you could actually drive into this swim and get hidden away behind these trees and fish out from the end out to the island in Dredger Bay. It was a favourite swim of mine, I really liked it. I didn't so much like the other one, but I loved this swim. Now at the time I had an old Volvo 245 DL, and if you don't know your old knackered cars, basically it's a great big green bus, and it was ancient. It was sold to me for 50 quid, and on the receipt it had sold as scrap. It had a spider's web windscreen, it had warning lights flashing all over it, it was always running out of oil, hydraulics, everything that was liquid that could go in there dripped out of it. It was a proper heap. But it was a great fishing motor, it was massive. Anyway, one day in the pouring rain, I decided I was going to fish this swim. And I came down this track, I used to spin around there and then reverse in to unload the motor and have stuff in the back of the motor and your little brolly in front and your rods down by the water. As I came round this curve, it was a camber like this, as I reversed in round in the mud, I could feel it going, and suddenly the old bus went sideways and it came towards here. Like I said, there was no bridge, this was just a drop into the water. It came towards here and the front and rear wheels on this side dropped off of the side, and it was basically stuck on the bottom of the chassis on that drop off. It was like the end of the Italian Job when the bus is hanging off the side of the mountain, and it was teetering on the edge. So I opened the other door, pushed Fat Sam the dog out, jumped out myself and dragged as much gear as I could out the back. I then phoned my mate Tenchfloke, and he had a, what were they called? Bedford Rascal, which is a tiny little panel van, tiny little thing. We used to have a nickname for it. We used to call it Orca, because when he parked up, there was this noise used to come out the fuel tank from the air in there, and it sounded like a whale song, so we used to call it the Orca. Anyway, he brought the Orca round, reversed it in, and we put some ropes on the back of it, and it was useless. I mean, this Volvo weighed tons, literally, and his van weighed nothing. And we couldn't get it out. Then we got another motor round and tied both of them to this old Volvo. And we pulled and we pulled and we tugged. And to be honest, it was getting worse. It was sliding in, and we thought we're going to lose this in the drink. So eventually, I think it might have been Phil Thompson, went off to see if he could get help. And up the road, he saw a farmer working in the field on a tractor. So he went over, and Phil was the only one of us that had any money at this stage. We were all bank tramps, but Phil had a proper job. And Phil went over there and gave him 20 quid, and he drove up here in the tractor, put a set of chains on and just dragged it clean out in one go and saved it to fight another day. Although it didn't fight for long. I think I had that motor about another 2 months. I think I dumped it. It might even be here. It might still be here. Who knows? So this is the actual dredger bay proper, or my favourite side anyway. Oh my God, that concrete, that concrete block's been there 30 years. Wow, I remember that. It was hideous to set your rods up in here. It's very, very gravelly, and I didn't have anything like a rod pod or anything quite as posh as that. But I did catch fish here. Well, I caught fish, plural. I had one small common from the swim next door, but one night in here, I was fishing. I had a boat, and I was boating right out to sort of those snags over there. There's like a little light coloured reedy bit now, and I still remember there's a little shallow apron out there. It was really, really weedy, the swim, like solid weed. And I'd gone over the weed, and I'd put a bait, hand placed a bait in about 1.5 foot of water, because I couldn't find any other spots. 2 of my rods was out there, but out here I couldn't find a single spot. And I went right on this shallow bit, and it was next to a coot's nest. And I thought, I don't know why I'm doing this, because the coot is gonna wipe me out. 100% this coot's gonna have me. Anyway, sometime in the night, I got beep beep, and I sort of went down, and I thought, it's that bloody coot. Anyway, I sort of slackened it a little bit and watched the bobbing, nothing happened. So I climbed back in bed, and then I got beep beep. And I thought, I don't know, and I've gone down there. By now it's sort of 3:30ish, something like that. And it just seemed really tight, the line, tighter than I normally fish. And eventually, you know, it bipped again, and I thought, something's going on. I've hooked the coot, you know, it's on the end in the weed. So I picked up the rod, and I didn't really want to move the lead, but I just tightened up, and it was solid. I knew it was solid, I could just tell. So I went down and gave it the big one, and it didn't move an inch. It was absolutely rock solid. And I thought, I can go out in the dark in the boat, or I can just put it back in the rests and see what happens. So I put it back in the rests, put it back on the alarm, and left it. At first light, picked it up again, I was bouncing it, and then suddenly I felt like a little back on it, and I thought, there's something on the end of this. You know, I'd gone out there in the boat, paddled myself out, or I think I pulled myself out, like sat in the front of the boat and reeled myself out there. Got over the top of it, and it was just huge ball of weed, but it was all drawn together. And I pulled and I pulled and I hand lined, and eventually, like this great big green octopus of weed left the surface and came up like that. And right at the back of it, I mean, it's huge, this piece of weed. And right at the back of it, I saw a tail, just a little bit of a tail lobe. Oh my God, there's one on. And I've started ripping the weed as much as I can, but there's far too much of it. And I've got the net in behind, and I had no idea what it was. I could see it, I knew it was a carp. And I've got it underneath, and I've managed to push it in, and I've got this fish in the net. And I've torn all the weed out, and I've pulled it into the boat. And it was Mary's mate, one of the absolute jewels of the lake. Such an amazing fish, big, long, dark, sort of linear style fish. I think she weighed 38 pounds or something like that, maybe 39. Incredible, but it'd been on there for hours, and it was me thinking it was a coot, and all the time it was this unbelievable looking Wraysbury warrior. So we've come right up the far north end of the North Lake at Wraysbury, and as you can see, we're in sunny meads. Beautiful, nice, comfy swim. Very famous little corner of the lake, but there's a twist, because this isn't the original sunny meads, and I'm going to take you up and show you where the swim used to be. So this is the original Sunny Meads corner, as we used to call it, because it's in the corner very close to Sunny Meads station. That's where it got its name from. Now, as you can see, it's not a swim in the sort of modern style of Wraysbury. In fact, it's a no fishing area now because of all of these snags that have fallen down on the right hand side here. But I used to literally sleep out mainly under the stars here on my bed chair, and this tree, which has fallen into the water, it's split, used to be obviously standing up, and I used to cast my rods from up the top of the tree, or at least lower them anyway. So this was the first year that they abandoned the old close season. So we were already on the lake and we didn't know this was going to happen. It wasn't right until the last minute that the close season got abolished, and suddenly we got the call that we could fish right through the spring. Now this area is where the carp always used to come to in spring. As soon as the temperature hit around 20 degrees, probably April time, the fish would come up into this corner. You couldn't fish for them, and this is where we'd pre-baited them the close season before we started. So we've moved on to the next spring. You're allowed to fish. Now in my mind all the time I had Sunny Meads corner, Sunny Meads corner. And I kept an eye on the weather, just kept monitoring it, and it was cold, it was wet, it was miserable, it was horrible. And then suddenly the forecast came up that it was going to hit 20, 21 degrees. I couldn't wait to get here. I threw all the stuff in the motor. I drove down, I parked up by the old NatWest Sailing Club, which is over the back there. And I come running round here, just praying no one was in here, no one was in here. And as I got just opposite, I could see into this little corner and there was no one here. I was like, oh, I can't believe it. And two of my mates, Phil and Tench Bloke, were both on the lake already. I thought, why are they not here? Surely the fish can't be here. So I came round and I shinned up that tree and I looked down, and the first thing I saw were two Wraysbury mirrors down there a few yards from the bank, just circling around. It's very shallow. It was generally weedy with a couple of little clear gravel spots, tiny gravel spots. And I see them grubbing about, and one of them I recognised as the fish that we'd been calling the pug, which hadn't been on the bank, or we hadn't put it on the bank. As far as we knew, it hadn't been banked. So I was obviously very, very excited. So I climbed up this tree, looked down, see the spots, took some baits out of my pocket and sprinkled them down on these little gravel spots. Then I came back down, got a rod, hooked the reel up in the tree, climbed up, and like I say, this branch here used to be standing up, so I shinned along there with the rod hanging, the rod butt hanging from my teeth so that I could climb. When I got in position, I got the rod, swung it, lowered it, trapped it and donked it down on this little piece of gravel. It was absolutely perfect. Sprinkled little baits around it. I could see there was probably 6 or 7 boilies down there on this clear spot, and one of them was mine, and I knew exactly which one was mine. I then threw the rod down into this, there used to be some reeds here, came down, set it up and repeated the process for the second rod. It was absolutely perfect. Sat behind the rods, didn't want to get up the tree, didn't want to be off of the rods. Got up, got down, got up, got down. This just, it just kept, I couldn't resist being up that tree and watching. And eventually I saw the pug, and he turned and he came round, and there were, like I say, probably half a dozen boilies, and he was working his way along, and he came up and he ate the one at the back, and then he ate the next one, and there was 3 to go before mine, and the next one I'm still up the tree, and I thought I cannot be up that tree when it goes. So I've quietly shinned down the back of the tree, and I've got in next to the rod. I'm hovered over the rod. I've looked out and I can see 3 or 4 little bubbles come up exactly where I am, probably a rod length out. And the line's twitched, just twitched a couple of times, and then it's pulled up tight, and I've bent down, I've picked up the rod, and I've struck into it. The rod's hooped over, sprung back as the line's parted, and I've ended up flat on my arse over there in the bushes. The line had been on there all winter. I hadn't checked it. It was the old monofilament, 12 pound or 11 pound. When I did check it, it was completely knackered. Totally my own fault, and I'd lost the fish of my dreams straight away. So I was obviously absolutely distraught. My mate Tench bloke came along from further up the bank, and I told him my tales of woe, and he went over to the off licence. There used to be a little off licence on the bank over there, on the backing onto the lake, and came back with a load of cold beers, and we sat here and drowned my sorrows. And I thought that was it. I thought I'd ruined my big chance. I thought they might come back, so I just slept out under the stars light on my bed just here, me and my little dog Fat Sam. In the morning, but I don't know, about 4, half 4 in the morning, I was woken up by and when a fish crashes, it's exciting anyway. When it crashes 1 rod length out on top of your bait, it's mad. And that fish came out 2 or 3 times. And I was just in bits, just hovering over the rods. Please, please, give me a second chance, give me a second chance. Half an hour later, I got my second chance. In fact, I got 2 second chances, and I ended up landing the short fat linear, caught once in 11 years, and a fish called the Hoover. Great big long fish with a Hoover mouth. Real old Wraysbury original, proper classic looking carp. So I sort of made amends, if you like. I put 2 fish on the bank, but still the loss of that first one, totally my own fault. I'll never forget that. But you know, that was the beauty of here in the spring, and obviously there was no close season, so I followed this on. That was it for that year. They never came back again. But the next close season, I was convinced that they'd still do the same thing. Creatures of habit. They'd have forgotten about me by then. The following April, first day it was 20 degrees, came running back round the bank. As I came along the bank, I saw 3 fish right next to the path over there. So I stopped. I could see there was no one in the swim. I stopped and I looked in. The 3 fish were the 3 amigos. It was the short fat linear, the pug, who I had an outstanding debt with, and the big leather, the big monstrous mystery leather, the size of Mary, huge great fish. Working their way down these margins, which is the route they used to take to get into this corner. So I run ahead of them, got round here, shinned up the tree and looked, and there was no carp present. But I could see from up the tree these 3 shapes coming along the edge. So same sketch, rod hooked on a branch, up the tree, in my teeth, got out on the end of the branch, swung it out, donk, lowered it down, same spot. Same with the other one, threw the rods down, got it all set up. I was sat in here, quiet as you like, and I could see the fish getting closer and closer and closer. And they'd just about made the corner over there when suddenly one of the rods just sprung into life, just whew, and it's away. And I thought, Christ, that was quick. It must have literally cut the corner and picked it up straight away. I've hooked into this fish. It's flat rodded me and it's gone mental out there. I've managed to stop it about 20, 30 yards out, and it's on the surface and it's going crazy. Just at that moment, my mate Tomo walked along that bank. He was just walking along there to carry a bag full of larg. I could hear it clinking. And he got to where I'd last seen the fish, and he shouted across, all right, I said, got one? Yeah, I've got one on. I said, I think it's the big leather. He said, well, there's 3 fish over here, one of them's massive. And instantly my heart sunk. I thought, no, if there's 3 fish over there and one of them's massive, that's the 3 amigos. I had no idea what I'd hooked, because from up that tree you could see everything, and I hadn't seen any other fish at all, but I'd got a big one on the end. Anyway, Phil came round and somebody else turned up, climbed up the tree, and they were watching me play it, and they see it coming up and they said, God, it's massive, it's a real big one. I think it's Mary. I was like, I didn't want it to be Mary. I'd caught Mary in the winter previously. I wanted it to be the leather. But anyway, it came in and it rolled up and it went in the net, and sure enough, it was Mary. It was my first 50 pounder, but it was the same fish that I'd caught an ounce under 50 the previous winter. But it was heart stopping. But the best bit about that fight was the first bit, when in here I thought I was attached to that big leather. Now, as far as I know, that big leather never got caught. I don't think it's ever been caught. It's not going to be caught now. It's probably long gone. Total mystery fish. But that's the sort of fish that make lakes like this just so appealing. To have fish in there, to have seen so many times something so elusive that never ever got caught. It's just, it was wondrous. And to stand here now, it's like going back in time, because obviously none of this has changed. Sunny Meads, is, apart from extra snags, is the same as it's always been. It hasn't been made into a nice cultured swim or whatever. It's still Sunny Meads, and it's still got the Sunny Meads tree. So here I am, almost 30 years on, and I'm back at Wraysbury. It's changed massively, you know, on the banks it's changed an awful lot. To be honest, you know, a lot of the aspects have changed for the better. It's secure. It never used to be secure. I haven't got to worry about getting my gear nicked or anything like that. There's paths, there's a lot better access, there's lovely areas like this. And the stock, the fish, the lake is now two halves, the south and the north lake. But the stock, it just got to a stage where I couldn't ignore it any longer. In this North Lake, where most of the bigger fish are, there's some enormous fish. There's fish of 50 pound in here. On my first trip back, which was the winter pre-COVID, so a couple of years back, I caught a fish called No Name at 48 pounds. 48 pounds, my second biggest ever Wraysbury fish. And I understand, I know they're different fish from different eras, but it's an amazing looking carp. Just sort of blew me away. I was like, oh my God. And there's lots of big fish here. There's loads of 40 pounders, loads of 30s, and a rake of 20 pounders. They're beautiful fish. You've got a lot of VS fish in here, you know, the Simon Scott's fish. Unbelievable. I think there's still, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there might still be 2 of the original commons floating around in here, and one small mirror called Rosie that I remember my friend Chili caught way back then, and that's still swimming around right now out there somewhere. But yeah, in general, it has changed a lot, but I like it here. And like I say, it just got to a stage where I couldn't ignore it any longer. And the South Lake next door, like I say, there's a bund now where the little river through used to be, has got a lot of really nice looking fish in there, and they're growing, they're really coming on. It's doing quite a few 30 pounders now, a few mid and even upper 30 pounders, and that's a beautiful venue over there, absolutely amazing. So yeah, all in all, I couldn't resist.